All right, it's time for another Sunday night news and nonsense. And I just got an email from Toss saying that he isn't going to be here tonight to do the show. So that's our show tonight. Goodbye, everybody. Oh, wait, I can't do that. I got Matthew Moore with me, and I've got Sam with us too. How you doing, guys?
Doing pretty good.
I'm doing great. How are you?
Like you really have to ask, huh? IBM buys the leader in Linux while putting on a Red Hat Save Big Blue. Hey, Matthew, I have to ask, does that mean now we have to call it Blue Hat Linux?
We might. I
Well, think of it this way. Okay, in the $34 billion deal, geez, what do you buy with $34 billion? That's a ridiculous amount of money. I've been reading a lot of stories into this, and we really, we have to wait a year before we find out anything about this anyway, because it's going to be a year before they can actually buy and acquire the darn thing. So, kind of weird. But I looked at it this way, okay? Apparently, IBM wants to have tactical superiority in the cloud, okay? And so this merger enables IBM to have the largest presence in the cloud, even over Microsoft. As if I just want, well, actually, Red Hat would probably never allow a merger with Microsoft. But could you imagine? Would you rather have Microsoft, you know, um, in control, or would you rather have, IBM in control of the cloud? What do you think, Matthew?
it either way, it seems like we're forced to choose the lesser of two evils, which in the end you still get evil, right? So I don't know. Um, but yeah, I mean, IBM is one of Microsoft's major main competitors, and with Microsoft investing in Azure and all of this other stuff, it makes sense that IBM would want to do something to compete with that. And I guess Red Hat is how they're going to do it.
All right. Well, we'll find out next year, folks, because really, really, it's going to be about a year. They're stating though that the Red Hat model is going to remain the same. Although I have a wrench to throw into this little machine later on during the show. But so those of you using Fedora and Red Hat have nothing to worry about. They just did another Red Hat release, so you should be okay. Not have to worry about that. All right, moving right along. Let's see what else we have next in the news. What you got, Matthew?
Well, System 76 just debuted their Thelio systems. These are open hardware standards. They're now being manufactured inside of the United States. The software, the company, and the hardware are all open, and they're all being made in the United States. And
Forgive me,
if you
Matthew,
guys,
but looking at the screenshot here, this looks like somebody's luggage.
yeah, it is very it's an unusual design, but I think it looks pretty good. For
Yes, it
those of you
does.
listening in audio only, you can go to the website. They have pictures of it there, but it's basically an aluminum shell, flat black, a nice milled aluminum power button, and it's wrapped in walnut. This is a very fancy designer computer. It is very good looking, and it also has a lot of really high end specs to back up its appearance. Of course, you have three different tiers. You have the Thelio, the Thelio Major, and the Thelio Massive. Um,
The
the
specs are on the screen for
Massive,
you guys.
the Thelio Massive has just insane hardware specifications. It says here you can get up to 768 gigabytes of ECC memory, 86 terabytes of storage, two Intel Xeon processors, which are scalable, 4 CPUs. You can choose from an RTX 2070, 2080, or you can choose from an AMD RX 550, 580, Vega 64. And the weakest of these machines, you can get 32 gigs of RAM, 24 terabytes of storage, Intel Core i5, 7, or 9, Ryzen 5, or Ryzen 7. These are really powerful computers, and they also look amazing. And they are quite expensive, but when you actually consider the build quality here and the specs that are being put into these machines, they're actually a pretty good bargain when you compare them to other machines on the market of similar spec. They
Matthew,
start at $10.99, and the most expensive one is $28.99.
my question is, what the heck are you going to run on this thing?
Well, I was thinking about building a particle accelerator in my basement, so I think I could these.
Or some science experiments, huh?
Probably, but I'm not going to tell you
She
what I'm going to
blinded
be
me
doing
with
with those.
science. Wink, wink, wink. Okay, let's see what's next.
How about some of that weird science stuff? That'd be cool.
All right. The Linux kernel 420 or 5.0, they don't know what they're going to call it yet, is the biggest all year with 354 plus thousand lines of new code. Linux kernel will be ending 2018 on a high note with the current merge window for what will be called either Linux 420 or 5.0, the biggest kernel update by lines of code in more than a year. The Linux 425 kernel merge window is expected to close later today when Linus Torvalds issues the first release candidate, and also clarifies what this new kernel will in fact be called between the two version numbers. On lines of code count, this kernel is easily the largest since the Linux 4.13 merge window that happened in September of 2017. I gotta say, I love what 419 did. It fixed an error that I was having on this machine when I shut off Intel graphics. I had a could not configure common clock error, and the new kernel actually fixed that. And everything seems to be running perfect. Gotta love what Linus Torvalds and the kernel developers are doing. They're always bringing new innovations and that sort of thing. So awesome sauce indeed. What you got, Matthew?
Well, I was just wondering, is Linux 420, is that legal in all 50 states?
No, only the states that pass the cannabis laws.
Yeah, so be careful downloading that one, folks. Anyways, it looks like Facebook is making some contributions to the Linux kernel. They're setting their Linux kernel tools free, making them open source. As you know, Facebook collects a lot of data. There's a lot of privacy concerns there, but because they collect so much data, they have to manage a giant fleet of servers. And to do this, they've developed a lot of their own tools that are Linux based that they use to manage these massive fleets of servers, and they are setting those technologies free. These include something called BPF, which is previously known as the Berkeley Packet Filter. They've made some contributions to BTRFS, and they're pretty much going to be releasing those under the Facebook copyright. I haven't looked into what that entails. Next,
but Matthew, it's Facebook. I mean, and they have their hands in everybody's privacy and that sort of thing. And do you really trust this?
I trust it about as much as I trust, I don't know. But
okay, moving right along.
I'm also using something called CG Group 2, Netcon SD, and OOMD, as well as something called PSI. All tools meant for managing a large fleet of machines, all from a central point. This could be very useful since Linux is pretty much the dominant player in the server world. This would be very beneficial to the Linux platform indeed. But, some of these are being released under copyright that Facebook owns, so I wouldn't be too open about it. I would definitely want to read that copyright and read the licensing and see exactly what it all entails. But it seems like this could help out the community quite a bit.
All right. And moving right along, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. That's right, Linux Mint 19.1 lands this Christmas with Cinnamon 4.0 and mainline kernel support. It will be based on the Ubuntu 1804 LTS operating system. All right, I'm thinking that Cinnamon is looking a lot better. It seems to be a lot more stable than when I initially ran it as a desktop a few years back, and it seems like I don't know, uh, I don't know about you, Matthew, but it always seems like every time I've used Cinnamon, I always manage to break it. How did that go for you?
Yeah, cinnamon for me is nice, but I've been making this complaint about the cinnamon desktop for a while now, and that's the grid spacing of the desktop icons. It's always just an eyesore for me. If they can fix the icon grid spacing on the desktop, I think I'll be pretty happy with it. And one thing to note with the 19.1 release, they are going to be introducing a new layout for the cinnamon desktop, and based on screenshots that I've seen, it kind of resembles Windows 7 a little bit with the square icons and previews and the wide over
Boo.
panel. So I don't know. I think Cinnamon has the potential to be a very good desktop, but I think it just needs some polish in some areas that are being neglected, like the icon grid spacing, the notification system, and just the overall workflow of it.
But why do they have to copy Windows? Windows is supposed to be copying Linux. Come on.
Well, maybe it has something to do with that Microsoft releasing all those patents. Now they can copy them to their heart's content.
All right, that makes sense. All right, any thoughts on this, Sam? You've been
I
sitting
think
there
it's
quiet all night.
interesting.
Okay,
And
okay.
also, of course, with a December release of Mint, you could say, you could eat some mint during the Christmas season.
Exactly. And nothing says you love your loved ones quite like a Linux DVD for Christmas. They make great gifts for all of your family and friends, and any true diehard Linux fan usually, prints out Linux CDs en masse and hands them out to everybody at work, everybody at church, and everybody that you know everywhere. And it's just a wonderful gift. Okay, let's see what we got here.
Well, speaking of Microsoft patents, Microsoft is in the news again.
Yes,
Microsoft is working on sysinternals for Linux. So they're going to be releasing some of their development tools for the Linux platform, and they will be able to be used by Linux developers for Linux applications as well as Windows applications. The main one is something called proc dump, which it allows Linux developers to create core dumps of their applications based on performance triggers. So let's say that you have a library or a module that runs on like a headless server or something, and it's malfunctioning or crashing. Well, you can set triggers in that software to make a dump file of all the processes and everything happening at the time, so you can debug the situation. And this is something Microsoft Windows has had for a long time. It's built into the .NET framework, it's built into the Windows kernel, and now that technology is going to be able to run on Linux as well, thanks to Microsoft's embracement of Linux.
I have a stupid question for you. How come they're just beating around the bush and giving us what they think that we should have instead of giving us what we need? We want a better .NET implementation so that we can get our Windows applications working on Linux. Are they going to provide that? No. They're not going to give us stuff to make our deprecated software to work better in Linux. Are they contributing code to Steam's Proton or CodeWeaver's or the Wine project? No. Come on, Microsoft. I mean, if you really love Linux, why don't you cough up the goods here? What say you,
Well,
Sam?
they're putting as much effort as they can into Linux in the areas that benefit Microsoft. I don't think they're
Yeah,
really
of
interested in
course.
Yeah, they're not interested in helping Linux. They're interested in helping Linux help Microsoft. That's what's really going on. But we can probably leverage some of these tools for our own benefit in the process.
All right, all right. Any thoughts on this, Sam?
I would say that, you know, Microsoft isn't necessarily in this for the open source goodness. They're just basically trying to profit off of Linux and open source software.
All right, and along the same game, I had to bring up games. There are now over 2,500 games on Steam Play for Linux, and I think all of you that are present in the studio here on Mumble have played with this. So we have and we have a little bit of time to talk about this. So if you've not heard about Steam Play for Linux before, it is what Valve has been working on to bring more Windows-only games to Linux devices. First, Valve improved the compatibility with the games that were available on Steam. This announcement happened back in August, and 2 months later, there are already more than 2,000 games available. All right, I've had an opportunity to play with Steam Play. I've even put up a video showing you how to take their Proton and load it into Play on Linux and run it separately from the Steam client. This is a magnificent piece of software. And interestingly enough, um, I understand that Codeweavers actually made this for Valve. And of course, everything that, the best way to support the Wine Project is to buy a copy of Codeweavers, because now Codeweavers has the Vulkan, the DXVK in Codeweavers now too. So if you want to be able to really try and get, which essentially is Steam Proton, and Codeweavers made it. So if you want to support the project and see more development, I highly recommend you visit codeweavers.com, get your copy of it, because you're helping them to make wine better. Awesome stuff. All right, Matthew, what have you tried on Steam Play, and how much success or lack of have you had with it?
Well, I won a copy of Goat Simulator from the Cup of Linux game night, and I
Yes, you
can tell you
did.
that that runs on the Steam Play pretty well. Um, but I'm not a huge gamer, so I haven't tried a whole lot of games on it, as well as having some low-end hardware. But so far, it seems like a pretty good implementation. Certainly, that there was some controversy from some people surrounding it, where, well, if you make the Windows versions of these games run just fine on Linux, then maybe there won't be much of an incentive to support the Linux versions. That's one side of the argument, but the other side of the argument is, hey, we can now run games that we weren't ever able to run before. So
Okay.
I can kind of see it from both sides, I suppose.
And on my end of it, there are times when there is a Linux version of the game available, but for some reason I can't get it working on my Manjaro box. Officially, Valve only supports its SteamOS or Ubuntu. So they're leaving us Arch/Manjaro users out in the cold. Not really, because we have ways to edit the command line parameters to put in some information to point to the libraries the game needs in order to get them to work. But something that I've seen a number of people that really want is the ability to choose. If a game has a Windows version, to be able to install that and run it in Proton rather than using the native Linux version. Namely, and the number one reason that I saw was that people want the extra features that the Windows version of the game has that are not present in Linux or Mac editions. So I'm hoping they're going to make that work, because it was my understanding that you would be able to do that, and so far that's not working there. Sam, have you played with Proton?
I have played a little bit of Proton, and funny thing is, if you go into your settings and you go to Steam Play, you click on Enable Steam Play for all titles. That basically allows you to use Proton even for the titles that aren't officially supported. So I actually do that, and I tried it with Hypershark Deluxe, which is a Windows-only game. It's not officially supported by Steam Play, but if you do check that box, you can get it to run, and I tried it out, and it runs extremely well, and I haven't really had any issues with it.
And I've tried X2 the Threat, which has on Steam is only they had a Linux release of it, but it's not on Steam. So that was the Windows version. I'm running Skyrim, and there's a few others, and I can't think of them right now that I tried out, and they all work. I haven't had a Windows game yet on my list that I tried that didn't work, but I had more issues getting the Linux native games running. And usually I'd have to do some serious research, or I'd have to try and launch the game from the terminal to find out what shared object file it needs, and then use the LD preload switch in the runtime parameters in order to get them to work. But that's jumping through some extra hoops that the beginner really isn't going to be able to digest. So it still needs some work, but there has been a lot of positive progress, so it's something well worth looking into. I mean, it's only been a few months now since they released this, and amazing stuff has come the table. So good job, Valve, and thank you, Code Weavers, for contributing that code to Valve so that we could have these innovations. All right, moving right along.
Well, for those of you in the community that are into Bitcoins, there is something out in the works now that you're probably going to love. It's called Brains OS. Brains. It's the first fully open source Linux based Bitcoin mining system. It's based on OpenWRT. It's basically designed to run on embedded devices. A lot of people that do run Bitcoin, I have some Bitcoin. I have 1/5 of a Bitcoin, but I am familiar with how it works. A lot of these people run headless units, and they manage them from a embedded like system through an IP address. This Brains OS would be perfect for that. It advertises that it would be able to reduce the power consumption of your equipment by up to 20%. So you can use that as just more power for your crypto mining. So, yeah, you guys that are into Bitcoin would definitely love that for sure.
I just have to ask. Somebody started the conversation last night during game night. We were all saying, brains, brains, give me brains. Is that what prompted you to bring up this article?
Not really.
It's just coincidental, then, right?
Yeah, it's coincidental.
I think zombies would love this.
Absolutely. Alrighty then. Okay. Is this nonsense? I don't know. Let me read the article to you and then you guys decide. We may know now the real reason for that IBM takeover. A distraction for Red Hat to axe KDE.
No.
While everyone was distracted by IBM's $34 billion takeover bid, Red Hat quietly wrote a death note for desktop environment within Red Hat Enterprise Linux. On October 30th, the Linux distro Biz emitted Fedora 29 and Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7.6, and in the latter's changelog, the following appears, which a regular reader kindly just alerted us to. KDE Plasma Workspaces, which has been provided as an alternative to the default GNOME desktop environment, has been deprecated. A future major release of Red Hat Enterprise Linux will no longer support using KDE instead of the default GNOME desktop environment. Now, I don't know if this is BS that somebody's just put out there to stir up the community, or if they're actually planning on doing this. It makes sense that since, the GNOME developers work for Red Hat, that they would want GNOME as their default desktop environment. But to close the door on KDE, would they be slamming the door on potential business? What say you, Matthew?
Well, it's an open source desktop environment. You're not gonna kill it. That's just not gonna happen. Too many people use it. It's in the community. If it's not officially developed anymore, the community is just gonna take it over, just like they do other projects. However, I could see one issue where GTK, because the GNOME stack and all this stuff, a lot of the GTK components are part of that. And if if they own the rights to those technologies, they could make it so these things are not able to be implemented into the Plasma desktop. I could see that happening, but as far as killing the desktop, that's not going to happen, at least not in the open source world.
Any thoughts, Sam?
I mean, a lot of the major Whoa. Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
So a lot of the major distros are pretty much all using GNOME by default these days, including Ubuntu, who have ditched Unity and switched back to GNOME. And it's like, I can't think of too many distros that exist that use KDE by default anyway. Sure, there are other flavors, but not too many of them use KDE by default. Most of them are GNOME, so I guess it makes a tiny bit of sense for them to get rid of KDE from RHEL, but oh well. Like you said, though, they can't really kill it.
Okay, well, at any rate, they're saying this is due for deprecation by 2024, so that's a long time down the road. By that time, maybe KDE might do something that is just so wow that it's going to blow GNOME right out of the desktop workspace arena. Who knows? Okay! So we don't know if that one's nonsense, but this one certainly is. Strange but true. Disney employees say the theme parks are popular for scattering cremains. Disney theme parks have ranked among the world's most popular vacation spots for decades, but for some guests, the resorts are much more permanent place of rest. Employees at Disneyland in Anaheim, California, and Walt Disney World, Orlando, Florida, tell the Wall Street Journal that the parks have become a favorite spot for visitors to scatter the cremated ashes of their loved ones. A Disney spokeswoman said such scattering of ashes on company property was strictly prohibited and unlawful, adding that guests attempting to do so with the remains of family members or friends will be escorted off the property. The article later goes on to say when somebody is caught, dumping the ashes in the haunted house or something like that, they actually have to shut down the ride for technical reasons and go in and vacuum up these ashes and put them in the nearest city landfill or wherever they decide to put them. Where would you like to have your ashes placed, Matthew? Busch Gardens.
I'd say probably in the Pirates of the Caribbean display. I could be right down in Davy Jones' locker. That'd be poetic.
How about you, Sam?
I'm not really sure. I've never really been to Disneyland.
Boo! So... Okay.
I guess maybe I could have them scattered all over the park.
You get the buzzer, buddy. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Okay, some people were wondering if this is a wormhole kind of thing. A Nazi-marked plane crashes onto California freeway and bursts into flames. A vintage aircraft with some of the markings of Nazi Germany's Luftwaffe crashed onto the 101 freeway in Agoura Hills, California on Tuesday and burst into flames. No one was injured. Despite the use of Luftwaffe's black and white cross, the plane was not a World War II aircraft from Germany, but rather a vintage North American AT-6 S&J trainer aircraft. The plane belonged to a Condor Squadron, a nonprofit organization which flies World War II-themed planes over parades, celebrations, memorials, and in mock dogfights. Okay, interesting stuff. And apparently this news um, got enough momentum that everybody on Twitter and stuff like that was basically stating that there was a wormhole and that, one of these ships was flying through the Bermuda Triangle and ended up in California in the future and stuff like that. So, yeah, some very interesting pictures of this too that people, tweeted and that sort of thing. So, yeah, and I don't know, but how somebody could have survived because that does not look like a survivable crash. But they said nobody was hurt, so that's good news indeed. Any thoughts on this, guys?
Well, I'm just curious if the people that saw this plane crash, if they looked up into the sky, if they would have seen a little Sopwith camel flying around, because those were the planes that we had in the sky fighting the Germans back then. So who knows if they did come out of a wormhole, that might have been the case.
Oh, right, and well, maybe they'd have some UFOs coming through there too, or whatever, Area 51 and that sort of thing. Okay. All right. Well, guys, we've run out of time. So that is all we have for you today on our Sinner Report. That's the Sunday night news and nonsense. And we'll probably be back. Well, of course, we're going to be back next Sunday at 7 p.m. sharp, Eastern Time, New York time. They're talking about changing the time zone here in Florida, Matthew. So that's going to probably mess everybody up if that ever comes into fruition, because then we're going to have to say we're starting at 7 p.m. Florida time, and for you that could be 8 p.m. and in New York.
And Spatry having his very own time zone, that might be something fun to play around with.
Absolutely. All right, but we will be back at 7 p.m. New York time next week. Same time, same channel. I hope to see you all there. We're going to hang out here on Mumble for a little while tonight. Maybe even play a little game of Star Conflict after I'm done wrapping up all this nonsense here. Goodness, what a mess I made of this computer today. I got to do some cleaning up before I can get the game on. So until next time, kids, peace out. And let me find the right button here. There.